Terry Tucker is a man of great intellect, experience, and perseverance. He overcame a rare form of cancer. He's a former police officer who says he's reinvented himself several times throughout the course of his career. These days, Terry spends his time as a motivational speaker whose main mission is to help people live their uncommon yet extraordinary life while everything else seems to be getting by. Are you ready to have a moving and prosperous conversation about prosperity and triumph? Well, if you answered yes, I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. So Terry, if you're ready, I'll welcome you to the program, and I'm excited to learn all about your personal and professional life. So great to be with you today, and thank you for taking a few minutes to talk to me.
Well, thank you, Kevin.
So Terry, I know that you say that you've sort of reinvented yourself multiple times during your professional career. So I'm interested to get you started by asking you how your professional experiences have sort of molded you into the person you are today.
Sure. Kind of as an adult, you're right. I have reinvented myself frequently in terms of my professional career, but only one of my jobs was truly my passion or my purpose. After I graduated from college at the Citadel, my first job was in the marketing department at the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International in Dublin, Ohio, as a marketing trainee. That's the same Wendy's that we probably all know as the hamburger chain that we see up and down the roads and stuff like that. That was when I realized that although I had a business degree, I knew nothing at all about what was going on in the business world. From there, I worked in hospital administration for a large hospital in Columbus, Ohio. And that's a job that was really kind of a prelude to the copious amounts of healthcare services that I'd be using later in life. I met my wife actually when I was at the hospital. And after getting married, we moved to California and I became the customer service manager for an academic publishing company in Santa Barbara. And that's where I became a reserve police officer with the city of Santa Barbara. And law enforcement has always been my passion or my purpose. And that was the first time that I was actually able to sort of dabble at being a cop. And then subsequently, when our daughter was born and we moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, I became a full-time police officer. And I worked in the areas of patrol. I was an undercover narcotics investigator, and I was a SWAT team hostage negotiator. My work with the Cincinnati Police Department was where I felt fulfilled as a person when it came to a job. And then following another family relocation to Texas, I started a school security consulting business and coached girls high school basketball in Houston. While coaching was somewhat frustrating on many levels, it was a great opportunity to have a positive impact on young people and to push them to become more than they ever thought they could be as part of a team. So that's kind of my professional career in a nutshell. And that sort of, in a lot of ways, has led me to kind of where I am today.
And you're the perfect person to ask this with your background in law enforcement. I'm curious to get your thoughts on what happened last Wednesday there in Washington, and where you think the system in terms of law enforcement might have failed, and where you think what we can learn moving forward from a law enforcement perspective from that incident.
Yeah, that watching that was painful. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, I think it was painful to see our democracy under attack. But I also think that those people and the whatever 70 some, 80 some million Trump supporters who voted for the president, they want to be listened to as well. And I think this narrative and the narrative, that we've been seeing for the last 8 months in terms of defunding the police and things like that, I think this narrative, like so many in our country, is being driven by factions on the extreme. I believe that 80% of the people in this country are good, decent, law abiding citizens who want what's best for their families, their community, and our country. And then you have 10% of the population that's on the extreme right, and another 10% of the population that's on the extreme left, whose agendas constantly show up on the nightly news as if that's how the entire country feels. And I just personally in my heart believe that that simply isn't the case. Straightforwardly, the power of any law enforcement agency comes from the people. And I've met so many people, that either now or when I was a police officer who don't want less police, they want more police presence and stuff like that. I recall my partner and I patrolled an almost entirely black area of Cincinnati for almost 4.5 years. And during that time, we led our relief in almost every category that was tracked by the department, felony arrests, misdemeanor arrests, stolen cars recovered, drugs recovered, etc. And yet we never got complained on. Nobody ever accused us of acting inappropriately. We were never investigated by the internal investigation section. So why was that? And I'd like to suggest there were two reasons. Number one, we treated everyone honestly and fairly. And number two, we knew how to talk to people. I got into law enforcement when I was much older. I was 37 years old when I became a rookie cop. As I see it, the police, kind of have become a catch-all for society's problems. We ask our officers to make split-second life and death decisions for a salary that's less than a plumber in an environment where nobody wants them around and certainly doesn't appreciate them, and under circumstances where everybody lies to them. Given that those are your working conditions, the conditions under which an officer works, you have to look at that and say it's a pretty safe bet that people get into law enforcement, they get into that profession because they want to make a difference. They want to help people. And, the police don't make the laws, they just enforce them. And if society doesn't like the way a law is being enacted or enforced, then work with your elected officials and try to change that. What we saw last week and what we've seen over the last 8 months in this country, there are a lot of people that want to be listened to. And I just don't think that we feel as a society that our government, our elected officials are doing that.
Terry, I thank you for sharing that, and it leaves your response leads to my next question, because I know that you had a battle with cancer, and you came out the other side of that battle. And I've made a point this year to be more grateful or mindful of the things that I already have in life established, and being more mindful of how blessed I truly am. So I'm wondering if you could recount for me your battle with cancer and how that changed your own perspective on your own life.
Sure. There's no doubt in my mind that literally the greatest challenge of my life, at least to this point, began in early 2012 when I was diagnosed with this very rare form of melanoma that presented on the bottom of my left foot. By the time the cancer was detected, it had spread to a lymph node in my groin. And because my disease is so rare, there's only about 6,500 people in the United States that are diagnosed with this type of cancer every year. It was recommended that I be treated at the world-renowned MD Anderson Cancer Center. So at MD Anderson, I had 2 surgeries to eliminate the tumor and all the lymph nodes in my groin, and I had a skin graft to close the wound where the cancer had been removed. After I healed, I was put on a weekly injection of a drug called interferon to help keep the disease from coming back. My oncologist used to say that she put me on that drug to kind of kick the can down the road and hope that it would keep the disease at bay so that more treatment options could be found. Interferon, at least for me, was a horrible, nasty, debilitating drug. And I took those weekly interferon injections for 4 years and 7 months before the medication became so toxic to my body that I ended up in the intensive care unit with a fever of 108 degrees, which usually isn't compatible with being alive. But fortunately, expert medical care saved my life. But each week when I was on those shots, when I was on those interferon injections, it gave me severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. I lost 50 pounds during my therapy. I used to joke to my wife that I was pretty sure that I was so skinny that I could go hang gliding on a Dorito, and in addition, I was constantly nauseous, fatigued, and chilled. My ability to even taste food diminished, and my body continually ached. And this misery went on for over 1,660 days. And one thing I learned during all my pain and suffering is that you have 2 choices. You can succumb to the debilitating discomfort and misery, or you can learn to embrace it and use it to make you a stronger and more determined human being. And I chose the latter. But I want your listeners to understand that there were days that I felt so poorly and was in so much agony that I literally prayed to die. I just wanted out of this life. Each day for me was a struggle to use my mind to override the apathy and the distress that my body was feeling. Now, I realize pain and discomfort can beat you to your knees and keep you there if you let it. But I also came to appreciate that I could use my pain and suffering to make me stronger. I was no better at dealing with pain and discomfort than the next person, but every day I found a way to survive with the knowledge that I would need to do it again the following morning. Unfortunately, my cancer experience hasn't ended with me conquering my disease. The melanoma that plagued me for over 6 years returned in 2017. And eventually my only treatment option was the amputation of most of my left foot, which occurred in January of 2018. The cancer returned in 2019, requiring 2 additional surgeries. And then last year, an undiagnosed tumor in my ankle grew large enough that it fractured my tibia, my shin bone. And that resulted in the amputation of my leg above the knee. And further testing found that the cancer had spread to both of my lungs, and I'm currently undergoing treatment for the tumors that are in my lungs. However, my doctor's not very optimistic about my long-term survival. But I refuse to be a victim to this malignancy. I vowed to continue my fight. I knew the only way the cancer could win is if I gave up or I gave in to the disease or it killed me. I understand what it's like to fight for your life. And the one thing I learned is that as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. But I also came to appreciate that the responsibility for altering your life is entirely up to you. Whining, complaining, and blaming others for your circumstances will not enhance your experience. Motivation alone will not cause you to progress. You have to want to make the change and commit to it every minute of every day. There are no days off when attempting to make significant and lasting change in your life.
Absolutely not. And I commend you for sharing that, and I thank you for sharing that. And I always tell people there's no 50% off policy in life. You've got to live each day to the fullness, right? So
Absolutely.
That's kind of the way I live life too. And I'm wondering if that experience was a motivation for the book that you wrote, the 10 Principles for Living an Uncommon Yet Extraordinary Life. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about the book and the motivation behind it.
Sure. literally, I wrote this book between the time that I had my leg amputated in April of last year, and I began chemotherapy for the tumors in my lungs, which I guess was around June of 2020. Sustainable Excellence, the 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life, was really born out of two conversations that I had. One was a conversation with a former basketball player who moved to Denver with her boyfriend, and my wife and I had dinner with them a couple times, and I mentioned to her that I was looking forward to watching her find and live her purpose. And she came back to me kind of sheepishly with, "Coach, what do you think my purpose is?" And when I told her I didn't know, and that's what her life should be about, she kind of became very introspective and really sort of was trying to internalize what that meant and where that she needed to go with that. So that was one conversation. And then the second conversation was with a college basketball player at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, who reached out to me on LinkedIn. And this young man asked me, what I thought were the most important things that he should learn to be successful, not only in his career, but in life as well. And I thought about what I wanted my response to be to him, because I didn't want to give him the standard, work hard, help others, show up early kind of stuff. I wanted to go deeper with what I went back to him with. So I started writing some things down, and over time, eventually I came up with these 10 principles that either I had experienced or learned about over my life, or that I was able or knew stories that other people had experienced. And I was able to use my life experience and those of others and apply them to these 10 principles. And one of the principles that I think is very important, and certainly one that I have violated on numerous occasions, is people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their minds. And another one that I really like is, you are the person that you're looking to become. I've had plenty of people that have read the book, young and old and kind of in the middle. And I've had a lot of young people tell me that they believe that the principles can be used for them as a guide as they continue to move forward in their life. I've also had older people. As a matter of fact, last week I had an 87-year-old man who read the book who told me that he wished he'd had these principles sort of codified for him when he was young. So, Sustainable Excellence, the 10 Principles to Finding Your Uncommon Extraordinary Life, came out in October of last year. And it's available now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, all that kind of fun stuff. So that's kind of in a nutshell how the book came about.
And you're a good person to also ask this question too. Because of the year that we've gone through, what do you think people can learn about the real frailty of life and the way that we go about our everyday business?
The only day that we're guaranteed is today. And we're not guaranteed anything in that day. There's nothing out there that says anybody or anything owes you anything. So from my perspective, I've learned a lot about, I don't know if you want to call it dying or however you want to say that. I think it's important for people to realize that this is the only day you have, and you've got to win that day, no matter how you do that. And for me, when I was on interferon and when I was as sick as I was, it was more about winning the minute or winning the second or winning the hour for me. I recall a quote from Mark Twain, who said that the two most important days of our lives are the day we're born and the day we figure out why. And when I speak to groups, I often ask people this question, do you have any idea why you were put on this earth? And sometimes I'll even take that a step further with them, and I'll ask, do you know why you were born at this time? Why weren't you born 5,000 years ago? Or why weren't you born, 50,000 years into the future? There's a reason that you were born. And that reason involves finding and living your purpose. I believe that we're all destined to live uncommon and extraordinary lives. And that has absolutely nothing to do with the type of job we have, how much money we make, what kind of car we drive, etc. You and I both know this. We are not all born with the same gifts and talents, but we all have the ability to become the best person that we're capable of becoming. The problem is most people take an unintentional approach to living. And by living a casual life, their dreams, their goals, their ambitions, they become a casualty of that unplanned living. I've had plenty of time to think about my own death during all these years that I've been battling cancer. And after I die, I can't imagine standing in the presence of our Creator, whoever or whatever you believe that entity to be, and being unable to account for the gifts and the talents that I was born with and that I didn't use to make the world a better place. As a police officer, and certainly over the number of years I've had cancer, I have unfortunately seen quite a few people die. And it's been my experience that the people who die what we would probably call peaceful deaths are those who utilize their time on this earth to find and live their purpose. On the other hand, many of the people who I observe go kicking and screaming from this world, the people who, I want another day, or I want another month, or can I get one more year? Those were the people who never did anything with their lives. They never saw the urgency of living their uncommon and extraordinary purpose. They never took a chance on their dreams. They never took the time to figure out who they were, why they were here, and what they were supposed to do with their life. It's been said that the wealthiest places on earth are cemeteries because they're areas rich in businesses never started, books never written, relationships never pursued, and dreams never realized. Years ago, I heard this really, at least for me, it resonated, really poignant Native American Blackfoot proverb that goes like this: when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. The only way to find your purpose is to search it out, to try things that make you uncomfortable, to fight against the status quo, to experience things that quite frankly scare you and sometimes just very well may be embarrassing. Finding your purpose or your why is essential because it's the reason you were born. And the only way to discover that reason is to be open to it and to search for it with your heart.
And Terry, I know you have kids, so I'm wondering, from a parent perspective, how are you surviving the pandemic, and what sort of a legacy do you want to leave for your children?
Yeah, my wife and I have been married a little over 27 years, and we have a 25-year-old, almost 25-year-old daughter. And there are so many lessons and qualities that I'd like to impart to our daughter, and that I try to show her by as a living example. What lessons and qualities. I try to do that every single day. But that being said, I have a Post-it note that's on my desk, and it has 3 sentences written on it, and I see it every time I sit down here at my desk. And those 3 sentences are this: number 1, you need to control your mind or it will control you. Number 2, you need to embrace the pain and the suffering you are experiencing in your life and use that pain and suffering to make you a stronger and more determined individual. And number 3, as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. So if she can actively live those 3 principles in her life, then I know my wife and I will be a proud parent. And she does live those principles every day. She attended the United States Air Force Academy, and she's an officer serving our country in the United States Space Force, which is the newly created branch of the military here in the U.S. So we're extremely proud of her. And I guess from that perspective, if that's my legacy, if that can be my legacy, then I'm pretty good with that.
And Terry, I'll end on this. I'm curious to know, for anyone watching this, what would be your parting message on how to bridge the divide between wanting to be heard and sort of self-expression versus wanting to get a consensus on um, sort of reaching common ground as a society? How do you think we can best talk to each other and still have a robust and healthy debate?
That's a great question, and I know. I mean, I think really what you're talking about is inclusion. You know, trying to have all of us be included in the conversation. And you know, I look at myself as someone who's been in a wheelchair since last April. That's kind of an excellent question. You know, there's an old saying that goes that where you stand on an issue usually depends on where you sit. And, let's face it, we all want to be included in this life, regardless of our abilities or our disabilities, regardless of our skin color, our education, our sexual orientation, our gender, whatever it is. We are born in love. We learn fear. We learn hatred. We learn bigotry. And we fear what we don't understand. And I think as a result, we sometimes segregate others based on that fear. There's an excellent video going around YouTube right now called The Interviewer. And I think it illustrates the importance of inclusion. And I'm just going to give you a quick synopsis of it. The video begins with a middle-aged man sitting in a lobby of a company waiting to be interviewed for an executive level position when a very professionally dressed young man named Dexter, who has Down syndrome, introduces himself and asks the applicant to follow him for the interview. Now, the applicant is clearly taken aback by Dexter, but he follows him to a room where the interview begins by the applicant being asked by Dexter what type of movies he likes. And the question's followed up by, why would the applicant want to take a pay cut to make the move to come to work for this company? Eventually, the boss, the real boss, enters the room and scolds Dexter for taking the applicant's file off his desk and pretending that he's doing the interview. The boss tells Dexter that his job is to take the coffee around to the staff and to make copies. The boss then asks the applicant to follow him to another room to continue the interview. Realizing that Dexter has some interviewing skills and was prepared to ask additional questions, the applicant turns the tables and asks Dexter why he had asked him a particular question. And Dexter responds with an excellent answer based on what he had read in the applicant's file. Based on that brief exchange, the boss realizes that he has misjudged Dexter and asks him to sit with the boss and to ask the remainder of his questions. And the video closes with Dexter getting another applicant, or greeting another applicant, I should say, and asking him to follow him to a conference room for a follow-up interview. Now, I think the moral of that video is that we initially judge people based on what we see. I see you as a black man, you see me as a white man, not based on what others, what you know or what you're capable of doing. And when we do that, when we judge those people, we miss out on some of the excellent qualities that you and I possess. I think it would be far better for us as a society if we removed all these labels that we keep putting on each other, Democrat or Republican, liberal or conservative, black or whatever it is. And we just assign people and we try to relate to each other just simply as human beings. If we can do that, if I can sit down and talk with you without you screaming at me or without me screaming at you, I think we can get a lot done in our societies.
Hey, Tara, I really want to thank you for a revealing and consequential conversation. Really enjoyed our time together, and I want to thank you for being here and sharing your personal story. It's most appreciated.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it.